He had lost everything that had once given his life meaning: a broken guitar, a faded past, and a city that moved too fast to notice him. But in the silence of his grief, with only the company of his loyal dog, Zahir discovered that sometimes the deepest melodies are born from the quietest moments. The music wasn't gone, it was simply waiting for him to find the courage to play again. In a small, forgotten corner of the city, nestled between old brick buildings and narrow alleys, there lived an old man named Zahir. His life had seen countless seasons, both joyful and sorrowful, and his face was etched with the deep lines of hardship. Time had not been kind to him. It had weathered his body, but not his spirit. The city, with its ever-busy streets and fast-paced life, had long ago forgotten him. But Zahir had one thing that no one could take away from him: his old guitar. The key guitar, once a finely crafted instrument, was now worn and scarred from years of use. Its wood was chipped, and the strings, although still in place, had lost their perfect tension. It was a far cry from the beautiful instrument it had once been. But to Zahir, it was more than just wood and strings. It was a companion, a confidant, a piece of his soul. Zahir's fingers, though now stiff and rough from years of hard work and age, still played the chords with a quiet grace that resonated with the hearts of those who stopped to listen. There was a certain sadness in his music, but also a profound beauty, as if each note carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Every evening, Zahir made his way to the same street corner. It was a place he had claimed long ago, where the shadows of the evening grew long and the hustle of the city seemed to slow for just a moment. With his guitar resting on his lap, Zahir would sit on the worn bench, his eyes half closed as he played. The world around him moved quickly. Cars, honking, people rushing by, their faces absorbed in their own thoughts. Yet Zahir remained in his own world, unaffected by the noise and chaos. He had learned long ago that there was no point in fighting the flow of life. The years had taught him patience, the art of being content with what little he had. As Zahir's fingers moved over the strings, a melancholic melody began to fill the air. The notes were simple, but they carried an emotional depth that was hard to ignore. Some passers-by hardly noticed, their attention consumed by their own lives. But every so often someone would stop, a mother with her child, a businessman on his way home, a young couple holding hands. They would pause, drawn in by the music, letting it seep into their hearts. Zahir's music was not for fame or fortune. It was simply an expression of his heart. His life had not been easy. He had lost loved ones, faced countless hardships, and endured many silent nights. Yet through it all, his guitar had remained by his side, the one constant in a world that seemed to change with every passing day. For Zahir, the guitar was a connection to the past, to memories of a time when life had been different. When he was young, his fingers had moved more swiftly over the strings and the melodies had been brighter, full of hope and dreams. But now, in his old age, the music had taken on a different tone, softer, quieter, and tinged with the wisdom of a man who had lived through both joy and sorrow. With each note that echoed through the alley, Zahir earned a few coins. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to buy a warm meal at the local shop, or more often than not to buy a biscuit for his beloved dog. Motu, a loyal and gentle dog, had been Zahir's companion for many years. The dog, a scruffy yet endearing creature, had come into Zahir's life when he had been just a pup. They had found each other at a time when Zahir had felt the emptiness of solitude more acutely than ever. In a world that had forgotten him, Motu had not. The two had forged an unspoken bond, one built on trust and companionship. Every evening after Zahir had played for a while, he would look at the small pile of coins at his feet. With a tired but contented smile, he would gather them up and walk to the nearby store. There he would buy a biscuit for Motu. It wasn't much, just a simple treat, but it was a small gesture of love, a way to show his gratitude for the dog who had stayed by his side all these years. Motu, for his part, always waited patiently, by Zahir's side, sitting quietly as the old man played. The dog's eyes, full of trust and affection, never left Zahir. It was as if they shared a secret, a quiet understanding that the world outside could never fully comprehend. Zahir would lean down, his weathered hands gently handing Motu the biscuit. The dog would devour it with a wag of his tail, savoring the simple joy of the moment. The two of them, in their small world, found contentment in the smallest of things: a few coins, a biscuit, and the music that filled the air. Though Zahir had little, he never felt poor. He had learned long ago that wealth was not measured in material things. His riches were found in the love of his dog and the music that still flowed from his guitar, despite the years. In the quiet comfort of their companionship, they had everything they needed. Sometimes, when the night grew darker and the streets grew emptier, Zahir would play longer. The city, now silent, would seem to listen to the music, as if it, too, understood the story of the old man and his guitar. His music, simple as it was, had a way of reaching deep into the hearts of those who heard it. And for Zahir, that was enough. It was enough to know that in a world that often moved too fast, his music could slow time, even if just for a moment. It was enough to know that his life, though humble, had meaning. That his dog, Motu, would never leave his side, no matter how old or frail they both became. And that, in some small way, the city remembered him. Not for fame or fortune, but for the quiet soul who sat on the corner with his guitar, offering his music to the world. And the moon rose higher in the sky. Zahir continued to play, his fingers moving over the strings with the same quiet grace as they always had. Motu rested at his feet, content in the knowledge that in this moment they were together. And for Zahir, that was all that mattered. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Zahir's routine remained unchanged. Each evening, he sat on the same street corner with his weathered guitar, playing for the few coins he earned and the small moments of peace it gave him. The city had its share of bustle, but Zahir's corner had become a quiet sanctuary, a place where time seemed to slow, where the world paused, if only for a fleeting second. Motu, his loyal dog, was always by his side, never straying far. Though the years had left their marks on both of them, the bond between the two had only grown stronger. Motu's fur, once thick and soft, had thinned with age, and his steps had become slower. But his love for Zahir was unchanged. His eyes, still bright and full of life, never left Zahir's face, always watching over him with the tenderness of a companion who had shared a lifetime of memories. The people who passed by the corner had come to recognize Zahir and Motu. Some of them knew his name, while others merely referred to him as the old man with the guitar. But regardless of whether they knew him or not, there was a shared understanding in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement of the simple life that Zahir led. Some would stop to listen for a moment, caught by the melancholy notes that escaped his guitar. Others would toss a coin into the old man's tin cup and move on, but Zahir never seemed to mind. The few coins were enough for him, enough to buy a biscuit for Motu, enough to keep them going for another day. One day, as Zahir played a soft, mournful tune, a young woman stopped in front of him. She was dressed in a smart business suit, the kind of attire worn by those who lived fast-paced lives in the city's heart. But something about Zahir's music seemed to stop her in her tracks. She stood there for a moment, her gaze fixed on him, as though the sound had transported her somewhere else. Zahir continued to play, his eyes half closed, lost in the music. He didn't notice her at first, but Motu did. The dog, sensing the woman's presence, sat up and gave a soft bark. Zahir, startled, looked up and saw the young woman standing there, a look of contemplation on her face. "Your music is beautiful," she said, her voice soft, almost wistful. It's like it's telling a story." Zahir smiled faintly, as he always did when someone took the time to acknowledge his music. His fingers never stopped moving over the strings, but his gaze shifted to meet the woman's. "It's just a song," he replied in his gravelly voice. "A simple song." The woman shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "No," she said, "it's not just a song. It's something deeper." She paused, her eyes flicking to Motu, who was now sitting obediently at Zahir's feet, his eyes fixed on her as if waiting for her next move. "Is he your dog?" Zahir nodded. "Yes. His name is Motu. He's been with me for many years." The woman crouched down slowly, her fingers hesitant at first. But Motu, ever the friendly soul, wagged his tail and trotted toward her. She gave him a gentle pat on the head, and Motu leaned into the touch as if he knew exactly what she needed. "That's a good dog," the woman said, her voice full of warmth. She stood up again, looking at Zahir. "I don't see many people who have this kind of connection with their pets. It's rare." Zahir shrugged, his expression humble but not without a certain quiet pride. "We've been through a lot together," he said softly. "He's my companion. We understand each other." The woman seemed to consider this for a moment, her gaze drifting from Zahir's weathered face to his guitar, then back to Motu. "I wish I had something like that in my life," she said quietly, almost to herself. Zahir didn't respond immediately. He didn't feel the need to. Instead, he let the quiet hang in the air between them, as the sounds of the city continued in the background. After a while, the woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small wallet, counting out a few bills, before placing them gently into the tin cup by Zahir's feet. "Thank you," she said, and then, after a brief pause, "for the music, and for reminding me of what really matters." Zahir nodded, his fingers still moving over the guitar. "It's nothing," he muttered, more to himself than to her. But the woman seemed to hear him. She gave him a final smile before turning to leave. As she walked away, Zahir could see that she had a thoughtful look on her face, as though something inside her had shifted. She didn't turn back, but Motu, who was watching her retreating form, gave a soft bark of farewell. The old man and his dog were left alone again, just as they had been before. But something in the air had changed. There was a quiet understanding between them, an acknowledgement of the fleeting moment they had shared with a stranger. In that brief encounter, the music had reached someone who needed it, just as it had reached countless others before. For Zahir, there was no need for gratitude or recognition. The music was enough, and the bond he shared with Motu was more than enough. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the street, Zahir resumed playing. His fingers, though stiff with age, moved with a practiced ease over the strings. The city, which had only moments ago been a blur of noise and activity, now seemed to quiet around them. And once again it was just Zahir and Motu, two souls weathered by time yet bound together by a love and understanding that could not be broken. It was an evening like any other. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets. The city was winding down for the night, the hustle and bustle beginning to fade as the streetlights flickered on one by one. Zahir sat on his usual bench, his guitar resting across his lap, fingers moving slowly over the strings as Motu lay by his feet, content and calm. As always, the evening was filled with the sound of Zahir's music. The soft, melancholic notes floated into the air, brushing past the pedestrians, the cars, and the noise of the city. Some people stopped for a moment, tossed a coin into his cup, and moved on. Others simply passed by, too busy or too distracted to notice the old man and his music. But that evening, something was different. Zahir had just begun playing a new tune, something slower and more somber than his usual melodies, when he noticed a figure walking toward him. At first he didn't think much of it, another passerby, probably in a hurry like the others. But the figure paused, standing a few feet away from Zahir. It was a young man, perhaps in his 20s, wearing a jacket and dark sunglasses. His demeanor was confident, almost arrogant, and his eyes lingered on Zahir's guitar as if sizing up the old man's every move. Zahir didn't stop playing. It wasn't unusual for people to watch him, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes out of a deeper connection to the music. But this man seemed different. There was something in his posture, something in the way he tilted his head slightly that made Zahir uneasy. The young man stood there for a long while, arms crossed over his chest, staring at Zahir without a word. Zahir glanced up briefly but continued playing, his fingers moving with practiced ease, letting the music speak for him. After all, it had always been his way to let the guitar do the talking. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the young man spoke. "You know," he said, his voice cutting through the air, "that guitar of yours is pretty old, don't you think?" Zahir didn't stop playing, though he slowed the tempo just a little, his fingers still gliding over the strings. "It's been with me a long time," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. The young man tilted his head and took a step closer. "I can see that. It's practically falling apart. You could probably get a lot of money for it if you sold it." Zahir paused, his fingers halting mid-strum. He looked up at the young man, his expression calm but slightly wary. "I don't need money," he said simply. "This guitar is all I need." The young man chuckled, a sharp, almost mocking sound. He took a few more steps toward Zahir, now standing only a few feet away, close enough to make Zahir feel uncomfortable. "You know, old man," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're wasting your time. There's no one listening to you. No one cares about your music." Zahir's fingers twitched slightly as he felt the sting of the words. He had heard things like this before from strangers, from people who didn't understand. But he refused to let it affect him. Instead, he met the young man's gaze, steady and unflinching. "The music isn't for them," Zahir said softly. "It's for me. And for Motu." He glanced down at his dog, who was watching the young man intently but made no move to get up. "As long as I have my music and my friend here, I'm content." Motu raised his head slightly, ears pricked, sensing the tension in the air. But Zahir's calmness seemed to reassure him, and the dog settled back down. The young man was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable behind his dark glasses. He looked from Zahir to Motu and back to the guitar. Then, with a sudden, almost careless motion, he reached out and grabbed the guitar, yanking it from Zahir's lap with surprising force. Zahir's heart skipped a beat. He was too stunned to react at first, his eyes wide as he stared at the young man holding the guitar. The old instrument trembled slightly in the young man's hands as he examined it, running his fingers over the cracked wood. "Look at this," the young man sneered. "It's falling apart, it's worth nothing." Without another word, he jerked the guitar's neck back sharply, making a loud, sickening snap. Zahir's breath caught in his chest as he saw the neck of the guitar break, a deep crack running through it like a wound. The young man let out a short laugh, almost as if he found the sight amusing. Zahir's hands shook as he reached for the guitar, but the young man pulled it further away, his grip tight. "You can have it back if you want," the young man said with a smirk. "But it's useless now. You should have let me help you sell it. I could have gotten you a good price." The old man stood up slowly, his hands trembling not from fear but from a deep, aching sorrow. He looked at the young man, his heart heavy with the loss of his beloved guitar. It wasn't just an object, it was a part of him, a part of his life. To see it broken like this felt like a personal violation. "I don't need your help," Zahir said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. He slowly reached for the guitar, his fingers brushing the broken neck. "I've lived with this guitar for years. It's been my companion, my voice when I had no words. And now it's a piece of me, just like Motu is." The young man raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Whatever. It's just a guitar." But Zahir didn't respond. Instead, he turned and, with a painful slowness, cradled the broken guitar in his arms. Motu stood up now, sensing the change in his master's mood. The dog walked over and nuzzled Zahir's side gently, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. The young man watched them for a moment longer, then, with a casual shrug, turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Zahir sat back, down on the bench, his hand still holding the broken guitar. The music was gone now, its voice silenced by the young man's reckless act. But even in the quiet, Zahir felt the presence of his dog beside him. Motu sat next to him, resting his head on Zahir's knee as if saying, "It's okay, we're still together." For a long time, neither of them moved. The broken guitar lay across Zahir's lap, a symbol of the damage the world had done to him. But in his heart, he knew that the world could break his guitar, but it could never break his spirit. And as long as Motu was by his side, he would find a way to keep going. The city had changed in the days that followed the destruction of Zahir's guitar. The hustle and bustle of the streets continued unabated, but to Zahir, it felt as though the world had shifted on its axis. The air seemed heavier now, filled with a silence that pressed down on him, a silence that matched the emptiness he felt inside. The guitar, once a constant companion, now lay in pieces, a painful reminder of how fragile things could be, how easily something precious could be lost. Zahir still sat on his corner, just as he had for so many years. But his guitar remained, broken, its wooden body cracked beyond repair. Motu sat beside him as always, his eyes full of loyalty and concern, as though trying to comfort the old man in his silent grief. For days Zahir had not played. The strings had gone silent, and the corner that had once echoed with music was now merely a quiet place where an old man and his dog waited for something. Zahir had tried to play, but every time his fingers touched the broken guitar, the melody he longed to create was swallowed by the sharp, jarring sound of its cracks. It felt wrong. The music was gone, and so was a part of him. But one afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange hue over the city, something stirred in Zahir. It was a quiet feeling at first, like a faint whisper, but it grew louder as he sat there, staring at the broken guitar in his hands. His thoughts drifted back to the young man who had broken the guitar, to the pain and anger he had felt in that moment. But then, something else began to rise within him. It was a small spark, a flicker of the same spirit that had kept him going all these years. I don't need a perfect guitar to play music, Zahir thought to himself. I have my hands, I have my heart, I have Motu. For the first time since the incident, Zahir looked down at the broken guitar and made a decision. He would not let this defeat him. He would find a way to play again. Come on, Motu, Zahir said, softly, standing up and patting his dog's head. Let's go. Motu stood up immediately, his tail wagging in that way that made Zahir smile. Together they walked slowly down the street. Zahir didn't have a plan. He didn't know where he was going, but something in his heart told him that there was still hope, still a chance for him to continue. Even if the guitar was broken, his music was not. They wandered through the city, past the busy markets, the crowded shops, and the people going about their daily lives. The city felt different now, as though the rhythm of it had changed, slowed just enough for Zahir to feel its pulse. They passed by the old music shop that Zahir had visited many times before. It was a small, dusty place, tucked between two larger buildings. The sign outside read "Old Strings and Things" in faded letters. Zahir had never paid much attention to it, always preferring to repair his guitar himself, but today, something urged him to stop. He turned to Motu. What do you think? He asked, half to the dog and half to himself. Motu, ever the faithful companion, wagged his tail in response, his eyes bright and eager. Zahir smiled, and together, they stepped into the shop. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and the smell of old wood and oil filled the air. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, hunched over a guitar that he was carefully tuning. He looked up as Zahir and Motu entered, his eyes softening, as he took in the sight of the old man and his dog. "Ah, welcome," the shopkeeper said, his voice warm and welcoming. "What can I do for you?" Zahir hesitated for a moment, then nodded toward the counter where a collection of guitars were displayed. My guitar is broken," he said quietly, his fingers brushing the edge of his coat as he spoke. "It's been with me for years, but it's beyond repair." The shopkeeper nodded understandingly. "I see. That's a shame. A guitar isn't just an instrument, it's a part of who we are." Zahir looked at him, surprised by how accurately the man had understood. "Yes," he said softly. "It's part of me." The shopkeeper set down the guitar he was tuning and walked over to Zahir. "I may not be able to fix your old one," he said gently, but perhaps I can offer you a new start." He gestured to the guitars hanging on the walls, their polished bodies glistening under the soft light. "These aren't just guitars. They're a way to tell your story." Zahir gazed at the instruments, feeling a stirring in his chest. He had never imagined that he might find another guitar, something to replace the one that had been with him for so long. But now, standing here, surrounded by the sound of strings, he realized that perhaps this was not about replacing his old friend, but about finding a new voice, a new way to express himself. The shopkeeper seemed to read his thoughts. "You don't need to make a decision now. Take your time, try them out. Music isn't about the guitar, it's about the soul behind it." Zahir walked over to one of the guitars, a simple acoustic, its wood smooth and warm. He picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands. It wasn't the same as his old guitar, but there was something about it that felt right. He strummed a chord, and the sound that filled the room was clean, clear, and full of potential. He could feel it then. The music was still there, waiting for him to bring it to life again. His heart swelled, and for the first time since his guitar had been broken, Zahir felt hope stirring within him. He wasn't done. The music hadn't left him. It had simply been waiting for him to find the courage to keep going. Zahir turned to the shopkeeper with a small smile. "I'll take it," he said quietly. The shopkeeper nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. "I thought you might," he said with a smile of his own. In the days that followed, Zahir's life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. The city's streets, which had once felt so heavy and oppressive, now seemed to hum with a quiet energy. Every evening, Zahir would sit on the same corner, his new guitar resting in his hands, his faithful companion Motu by his side. The music that had once been silenced by the broken strings of his old guitar now flowed freely from the fresh instrument. At first, the sound was unfamiliar to him. The new guitar, with its smooth neck and clean chords, had a different voice, a different tone. But as the days went by, Zahir's fingers began to remember the songs of old. He played with a gentler touch, allowing the new guitar's voice to merge with his own, creating a harmony that felt like a bridge between the past and the present. The first few notes were tentative, hesitant even, as if Zahir were testing the waters, unsure of whether he could truly start over. But as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, the music became stronger. With each strum, Zahir found his confidence returning, his soul reconnecting with the melodies that had always been a part of him. And though the music had changed, it still carried the same raw emotion, the same quiet sadness, the same spark of life. Motu sat beside him, watching with those ever-loving eyes, as though he understood the deep well of emotion that flowed through the strings of the guitar. The dog had never left Zahir's side, and now more than ever, Zahir felt grateful for his presence. Motu was more than a companion. He was a part of Zahir's very soul, a reminder that love and loyalty could withstand the toughest of trials. One evening, as Zahir played a soft, melancholic tune, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the street. It was the young woman who had stopped to listen to Zahir's music months ago, the one who had recognized the depth of his song. She was, walking slowly, almost as if she were drawn to the music once again. Zahir didn't stop playing. He didn't need to. He continued the song, his fingers moving with a newfound ease, as if the guitar had become an extension of himself. He knew she was there, but he didn't acknowledge her right away. She had heard his music before, and he didn't want to interrupt the flow. The woman stood in front of him once again, her eyes closed as she listened to the music, her face softening with every note. When the song finally came to an end, she opened her eyes and looked at Zahir with a quiet intensity. "It's beautiful," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. Zahir smiled faintly, not in pride, but in a quiet sense of contentment. "It's just a song," he replied, his voice humble as it always was. The woman looked at him for a moment longer, as though trying to find the right words. Finally, she spoke again, her voice filled with a mixture of wonder and sadness. "You know, I was thinking about you the other day," she said. I was thinking about how your music, it made me realize something. Zahir raised an eyebrow, not entirely sure where this conversation was going. But he didn't speak. He simply waited. I've been so focused on everything I thought I needed. My career, my success, the things I thought would make me happy. The woman continued, her voice carrying a faint trace of regret. But listening to you play, it made me realize that I've forgotten the most important things. The simple things. The things that truly matter. Zahir's eyes softened as he listened to her words. He had heard this sentiment before from others who had lost their way in the noise and chaos of life. It wasn't surprising that she had come to this realization, but it still warmed his heart to hear her speak it aloud. I was in such a rush to get somewhere, she said, her voice trailing off. I never took the time to appreciate what was right in front of me. And now I see that I've missed so much. Zahir nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The world moved quickly, but the moments that truly mattered were the ones that could be so easily overlooked. The woman stepped closer, her eyes meeting Zahir's with a new sense of understanding. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for reminding me. Zahir didn't say anything in return. There was no need for words. Instead, he picked up his guitar again and began to play another song, this one slower and more hopeful. The music seemed to fill the air between them, a silent bridge connecting their hearts. The woman stood there, her eyes closed, her heart open, letting the melody wash over her. For a long time, Zahir played, the music becoming a language all its own, one that transcended words. And as the final chord echoed into the night, the woman turned to leave, her footsteps light on the pavement. But before she did, she stopped and turned back. I'll come back to listen again, she said with a gentle smile. I need to hear more. Zahir nodded, his eyes twinkling with quiet approval. Whenever you need to. As the woman walked away, Zahir felt a sense of peace wash over him. There had been a time when he might have felt the need for recognition or applause, but now he understood. The music was for him, for Motu, for the moments of connection, those brief encounters that reminded him of the beauty of life, even in its simplicity. With the woman gone, Zahir played one last song before the night deepened around him. Motu lay at his feet, his eyes closing in contentment as the music filled the air. And Zahir, with his new guitar and his loyal companion, played not for the world, but for himself. In the silence of the night, Zahir understood something profound. The music was never about the guitar, the audience, or even the success. It was about the act of creation, the catharsis of expression, and the quiet peace that followed. The world may have taken his old guitar, but it could never take his music. And as long as he had Motu by his side, he would never be without a reason to play. As Zahir's fingers once again caress the strings, his music weaves a tapestry of hope, resilience, and the unspoken bond between man and dog. In the face of loss, he found his way back to the melody of life. And just like him, we all carry within us the power to heal, to begin anew, and to find beauty in the quietest moments. So next time you pass someone lost in their music, their struggle, or their journey, pause, listen, and remember that even broken things can be mended, and even the quietest souls have a song worth hearing. What song are you holding back from the world?